At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, friends. My name is Ralph Amsden, and you are listening to the ASU Forecast on the 1012 Podcast Network. We are brought to you by Charlie Hustle. CharlieHustle.com. You're going to want to use the promo code 101215 for 15% off all non-sale items. What am I talking about? Charlie Hustle Clothing Company is a vintage-inspired clothing company based out of Kansas City. We're in Big 12 country now. It specializes in collegiate and hometown apparel. Charlie Hustle loves the Big 12 Conference and wants every Big 12 fan, that is you, Arizona State fans, to be the best dressed this season with their wide selection of officially licensed collegiate apparel. That's Arizona State. We're part of the Big 12. I keep having to remind myself this. And if you go to charliehustle.com, you can use the promo code 10, TEN 1215, the number 12 and 15, for 15% off all non-sale items. They also have more than 30 schools to choose from, because we all know Arizona State fans, surrounded by fans of other teams at all times. And the teams that they have to choose from includes all 16 Big 12 schools. They've got you covered with all your collegiate apparel needs. Shop today at charliehustle.com and use the promo 101215 for 15% off all non-sale items. Again, that's charliehustle.com. Promo code 101215 for 15% off all non-sale items. Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh. Okay, now that we've paid some bills, I recorded this entire episode. This was just going to be a Kansas preview. I was so excited. We had our Sun Devil Spaces on Twitter on Wednesday night. We had a great conversation. This is the first meeting ever with the University of Kansas. First ever. Pretty incredible when you think about it. We both share a border with Colorado. It's not like this is University of New Hampshire. It's not like it's 3,000 miles away. Kansas has been playing football a long time. Arizona State's been playing football a long time. They have never met. Of course, they've met in basketball. The Adidas link-up helped make that happen, and Bobby Hurley was able to take down the Jayhawks, I believe not once, but twice. And now we get to try to do it in football, and I'm very, very excited about that. However, I recorded this entire episode right before some news dropped, and I did not know that this was coming out on October 3rd, 2024. I didn't know. I had no idea. I thought that we were going to get this maybe a year or two ago, but we got an NCAA essentially resolution, and I know it's come in pieces, but everything has kind of been wrapped up in a messy bow, not a neat little bow, but a messy bow, outlining what responsibilities assigned to each assistant coach that was under Herm Edwards that got us in this little kerfuffle with the NCAA. And so we're going to re-record this show, and we're going to go through this. It's 67 pages, so I'm going to peruse it. We're going to go through this. Feel free to skip this section if you just want to hear about Kansas football, but we are going to go through this page by page. We're going to read some of the highlights, and we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what was going on at Arizona State that led to this just goofy season that saw several assistants fired. Herm Edwards mutual decision out of the program mid-season after losing to Eastern Michigan. A season of Sean Aguano leading to where we're at now with Kenny Dillingham. And let me be really, really clear from the outset. I'm grateful for where we're at as a program. I love having Kenny Dillingham as Arizona State's head coach. If this is what it took to move us in that direction, then it is what it is. You know, I'm not an everything happens for a reason person, but I am somebody who says that you can trace back everything that happened from a place where you're satisfied. You're going to see a lot of broken parts along the way. It's true in life. It's true in sports. I mean, at the NFL level, you know, sometimes it takes going 2-15 to get the number one pick to change your fortunes, to change your franchise. And in college football, sometimes you got to break the bone to reset it. And I'm very satisfied with where Arizona State is right now. But so much of what happened over the past few years should never have happened. And this report, it's I won't say damning, because it's just information. It's just facts. Some people participated, some people halfway participated and they disagreed with the resolution. Some people didn't participate at all in talking to the NCAA, and they got the absolute book thrown at them. So we're going to go through some of this. But before we do, just to recap, and again, some of you are probably so done with this scandal that you're just going to want to skip ahead. But if you're curious, brief recap. Here's where we're at. It's June of 2021. Arizona State had just played a 4-game season due to the COVID pandemic. There was a situation in which Arizona State went into a game with USC, potentially didn't close contact the right players out. I know USC kind of blames Arizona State for them having to miss a bunch of time. But anyway, everybody at Arizona State ends up getting sick. A bunch of people at USC end up getting sick. And the season is effectively over from that point. There was a couple more games played. I believe that's a 70-7 season. So a couple of decent things happen in 2020, and then you move into a very long off season of uncertainty, moving into 2021, where you don't know what restrictions are still going to be in place. The dead period is extended, and so in order to get an advantage when there's a moratorium on all types of travel and recruiting, Arizona State assistants made some decisions that would come back to haunt them, that would come back to haunt the university. Now, a lot of that transpired in the fall of 2020 and in the early part of 2021. Fast forward to June 2021. I am visiting Arizona. I'm out recording a podcast to Speak of the Devils with Brad Denny. Speaking of which, I did a quarter season check-in with Brad Denny and Joe Healy, Speak of the Devils. Did that last week. That's why we skipped the episode of the Forecast last week, to give all the attention to Speak of the Devils. Very grateful for them having me. Had an absolute blast on that show. But I was actually down recording a podcast with my guys Chili and Cody Cameron from Arizona Varsity at the time. And we were at Brad Denny's house. And we were recording, it was sort of like a recruiting primer. Like, how is Arizona State doing in recruiting? How are they doing in the state of Arizona? How are they getting some of the guys that they're getting from all over the country? When you're in a down period, answering all those questions. It's a podcast that never came out, because after recording that podcast later in the day, I received a tip from somebody who had some information at Arizona State that a dossier had been passed to both Pete Thamel and the NCAA. Now, I have a podcast partner who I'm a producer for Unafraid Show on YouTube. It's run by George Reister, former NFL tight end, former Oregon tight end. I told him about the information that I had received. He vetted it. He checked in with some people, with some high-level college head coaches who were like, oh yeah, not only is that true, we've all known about it for a very long time. So I have this conversation with George Reister. He's able to confirm that, not only is Pete Thamel working on an expose of Arizona State in this dossier that was given over to the NCAA, but it was actually common knowledge throughout college football that Arizona State was going outside of the bounds of what was allowed during COVID. Now, they were not the only team doing this, right? And I've heard that from a lot of Arizona State fans. It wasn't just us. It wasn't just us. That's true. A lot of the schools that were engaged in impermissible recruiting, such as Michigan, also got caught, right? What makes what Arizona State did different than a lot of other schools is going to be revealed as we go through this document. But for the time being, it's June 2021. I am sitting in my house. I get a phone call. I call George Reister. He's able to confirm some of these things. And I'm just like, hey, what do we do with this information? And he kind of did a watch this. And he tweeted a GIF of a nuclear bomb, which we got a bunch of criticism for this. Well deserved. It was not a fun time. But he tweeted this GIF with a nuclear bomb. It basically said, the balance of power is about to shift out west. And now what you have to understand about that tweet from George Reister is ASU was recruiting so effectively. They were on the upswing. We all had a belief in Jaden Daniels that he had Heisman potential. ASU had multiple first-round picks at receiver. They really were on the upswing under Herm Edwards. And so what George was trying to say is the scandal is about to shift the balance of power on the West Coast. as far as, the expectation is that Arizona State was nipping at USC's heels. They were going to be a force in the Pac-12 South. So that was definitely some hyperbole on his end. We took a lot of flack for it, but he put that tweet out there, and there was a lot of response to it, a lot of it negative. We ended up having to get on and clarify. And at around the same time, Pete Thamel was in the process of getting his report ready. But Doug Holler at The Athletic saw that tweet from George Reister, started to dig into it, and then ASU confirmed to Doug Holler that, yes, that is who George Reister's tweet was talking about. So this thing that Pete Thamel had in hand was actually broken by Doug Holler as far as the specifics of it. Once that happened, George and I kind of went on a podcast. We talked a little bit about what was going on and what we knew. At the time, I'd been given so much information about just months and months and months of ASU really kind of playing extraordinarily fast and loose with the rules. But not only that, but an extreme fracture within the program of two kind of warring camps of people who I can't even testify to their character in wanting to do things the right way, but people who certainly disagreed with the way that Herm Edwards was doing things, people who believed that that it wasn't actually Herm Edwards running anything, that Antonio Pierce was effectively in charge of the team, and we'll get into that as well. But that they had serious issues with the amount of power that Antonio Pierce had been given under Herm Edwards, how he had shaped the program to his liking, and the ways in which it threatened their ability to do their job and their ability to potentially escape consequences if this stuff was to have come out. So a large group of people were very dissatisfied, and a group of that group put together a dossier that they handed to the NCAA, and word got back to me. So that is my involvement in all this. I talked to George Reister. He sent out a tweet. That tweet tipped off Doug Holler. Pete Thamel was already working on it. The entire thing blew up. It was definitely not a fun month for me. Even having any affiliation with it whatsoever. Man, I was getting some of the absolute worst messages. People were on message boards calling me all sorts of names, some of which I probably deserve for not necessarily knowing how to handle that situation properly, in the moment. But yeah, so that podcast with Brad Denny, that never came out. That's some B-sides or some director's cut stuff that maybe will come out someday. I'm sure there's plenty of praise for Antonio Pierce on there as well, which makes the entire thing very ironic. But I say all that to say this. That was 40 months ago, 4-0. And now we finally have a resolution. The punishments had already been in place. We'd already moved on from Ray Anderson as athletic director. Herm Edwards is gone. A lot of the people that were involved in this, one is currently working for the Baltimore Ravens. One, I believe, is coaching high school. One is an assistant with the Seattle Seahawks. One is the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. One has moved into a media role. Some really, really insane things have happened since then. But I don't expect that I'm talking to anyone who isn't familiar with what happened with ASU football and hasn't followed along with this scandal. I just wanted to give some background. And now let's get into the report, the 67-page report from the NCAA that was released earlier this morning. It is titled Arizona State University Public Infractions Decision. And I've highlighted some things that I want to go over in here, and I'll pause to add some commentary of my own. And then we'll move on from this whole thing. But to sum up, there was a panel, an investigation, and here is who it all involved. Okay, so this is from the introduction to the Arizona State University Public Infractions Decision. It says the panel processed violations for Arizona State and 7 football staff members through a separate negotiated process. The institution and 4 involved individuals, former head coach Herm Edwards, a former assistant football coach Prentice Gill, a former assistant football coach Chris Hawkins, and a former assistant football coach Zach Hill, agreed to the facts, agreed to the violations, agreed to the penalties. 3 involved individuals, former assistant equipment manager Eric Bowman, former assistant football coach Derek Hagan, ASU star wide receiver, NFL wide receiver Derek Hagan, And former defensive line coach Rob Rodriguez did not participate. They did not interview with the NCAA, didn't give their testimony, and for that, their penalties were pretty severe. And then it says, apart from the negotiated resolution, 2 individuals contested their violations. Those individuals are former associate head football coach and recruiting coordinator Antonio Pierce and former non-coaching football staff member with sport-specific responsibilities, Anthony Garnett. This decision solely relates to the conduct of Pierce and Garnett. Both individuals agreed to process their cases via a written record hearing. Despite their selected resolution method, Pierce did not provide a written submission, and Garnett's submission only partially addressed the allegations. So they said, we disagree. We want to essentially tell our side of the story. And then Pierce just didn't, and Garnett didn't fully respond to all of the allegations. So at this point, now that they've dealt with all of the parties involved, the NCAA is able to put out what they were accused of and what the findings were. And you have to understand that this involved so many student athletes that a lot of what the NCAA did is interview those student athletes. Now, interestingly, you're not going to hear the name Adam Breneman. You're not going to see the name Adam Breneman in this 67-page report, but there is a reference to an unnamed coach. And so you can kind of make the connection, make the assumption there. Now, this is very long. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to peruse it for some of the things that that are probably the most interesting, even though this entire thing is pretty interesting if you've lived this out for the last 40 months. So this is the ultimate early statement from the NCAA is that Antonio Pierce and Anthony Garnett's underlying violations were part of a program-wide effort to engage in impermissible recruiting activities during the COVID-19 recruiting dead period. Now, I'm going to stop right here and say some of you listening to this might have different feelings about the COVID restrictions that took place in that time period than other people. We have to throw that out the window. We have to look at it through the lens of what the rules were at the time, whether you felt like they were justified or not. So we are dealing with temporary emergency rules in place that even if those rules weren't in place, most of these were just regular violations. So the misnomer is that this has to do with the fact that there were special restrictions in place because of COVID. Had those restrictions not been in place, almost every single thing on here is still an NCAA violation. So let's be really, really clear about that, okay? So let's get back to it. Although their violations were related, it's talking about Antonio Pierce and Anthony Garnett, their level of involvement in the recruiting activities varied. Stated directly, Antonio Pierce was the central actor, whereas Garnett and other staff members played supporting roles in the violation. So the NCAA is presenting this as like, best actor would go to Antonio Pierce and supporting actor would go to everybody else. And that includes Herm Edwards, which is hilarious when you consider that, you know, this whole thing has really been portrayed as Antonio Pierce was acting head coach, and the NCAA report reflects that. They put Herm Edwards in as an accomplice to his own assistant, which is just a wild thing to think about. So, back to the report. Antonio Pierce knowingly and blatantly disregarded fundamental dead period legislation to orchestrate the majority of the violations in this case. His defiance and indifference to NCAA rules was in part motivated by his observation that he needed to maintain an aggressive recruiting presence in order to compete with what he believed other institutions were doing during the dead period. So, according to one staff member, now, when they don't name names in here, sometimes I assume it's Breneman. It might not be. But it says Antonio Pierce did not fear the potential consequences for the NCAA violations due to the financial security provided by his self-proclaimed wealth. So you have to remember, Antonio Pierce played in the NFL, won a Super Bowl, made a Pro Bowl, all of those things. He is painting himself as wealthy, though simultaneously, while all this is going on, Antonio Pierce is operating multiple car dealerships where there are not only hundreds of cars missing, but a program in which you got service for life when you bought these cars that was not being adhered to, as well as the loans not being paid back to the creditors for the vehicles. So there were multiple levels of potential fraud going on at these car dealerships that Antonio Pierce was invested in. At the time that all this was going on, Antonio Pierce, was probably in debt tens of millions to creditors. So portraying himself as wealthy and not feeling like there was going to be any consequences is very interesting, considering what was actually going on in his personal life at the time. So let's get back into this. They called it a scheme. The NCAA called this a scheme, like the entire thing was organized and well thought out. I don't know how well thought out it was, but the NCAA refers to this as a scheme, and it says most of the violations stem from a scheme by which Antonio Pierce and other football staff members and a booster, Regina Jackson, Jaden Daniels' mother, arranged unofficial visits to the institution's locale for roughly 1 year. So this wasn't just the one time that the receipt provided, that was in the dossier. This is over the course of an entire year, where things were run through Jaden Daniels' mother, and we'll get more into that in a second. It says during the visits, football staff members had in-person recruiting contacts with prospects and their families. Those contacts often occurred during impermissible tryouts, football facility tours, or other entertainment activities. Likewise, staff members provided for or arranged for prospects and their families to receive inducements. There's no reference in here to like any direct cash payments or anything. This is me talking. There is a lot of references to equipment and apparel being given away, which is why one of the low-level equipment staff members, Bowman, was fired, and he did not participate or talk to the NCAA about any of this. So it says Antonio Pierce arranged or personally provided free meals, apparel, airfare, lodging, local transportation, or entertainment expenses to at least 27 different prospects. Due to his knowing involvement in the inducements, Pierce violated the principles of ethical conduct. In conjunction with the visits, Anthony Garnett also facilitated a tryout, directed impermissible transportation, and had in-person recruiting contacts with prospects and their parents. All of these violations are level 1. And they took this on the road. Okay, they took it to St. Louis, Missouri. They took it to Des Moines, Iowa. They took it to Miami, Florida. Anthony Garnett is not a coach. Well, first of all, you weren't allowed to travel, I believe, during that time. And also, Anthony Garnett was not a coach that had that ability to go out and recruit. He was just going, with Antonio Pierce to execute these different recruiting visits all over the country. And aside from all that, this is another thing that's listed in the public decision. Antonio Pierce directed one of his assistants to violate recruiting communication legislation by sending 46 text messages and placing a phone call to a 4-year college prospect who was not in the transfer portal. So this is an unnamed assistant. So again, anytime that they mention an unnamed assistant, I'm just going to let you fill in the blank there. I talked about it earlier. They were recruiting someone who was at school somewhere else. Now, this is a thing that happened to Arizona State with Ladarius Henderson and Michigan. This is a thing that goes on. It's really annoying. It's also very hard to get caught doing this, and Arizona State managed to get caught. That particular thing is a level 2 violation. Following their employment at Arizona State, Antonio Pierce and Anthony Garnett failed to cooperate when they provided false or misleading information to the NCAA enforcement staff regarding their involvement in the violations. Shortly thereafter, Pierce also failed to cooperate when he did not provide the enforcement staff with requested copies of his financial records. This is something he's not required to do. And so those were level 1 violations. So Antonio Pierce and Anthony Garnett got level 1 violations for failing to cooperate. So they have violations involved with the investigation. So here's an aside. The Committee on Infractions chair granted immunity to an assistant coach who engaged in impermissible recruiting. And as a result, that assistant coach was not party to the notice of, and is not at risk for allegations in this case. And that assistant coach is not named in this decision. Again, connect the dots. One of Arizona State's assistants got immunity for providing all of the receipts. There was an assistant that was fired from Arizona State or resigned from Arizona State that was implicated in all this who was mentioned nowhere. So again, you're going to have to connect points A to B on that one. A, B. Think about it. Okay. So, let's get back into this. Just some of the facts. The case, it related to 35 different prospects and their unofficial visits to Arizona State on 15 separate weekends from July 2020 through May 2021. So over an 11-month period, 35 prospects and their families visited over 15 separate weekends where it was not allowed. Okay. So, let's get into some of the very specific things. Now let's get into Prentice Gill's cooperation. Now Prentice Gill was hired to be the wide receivers coach. He replaced, Charlie Fisher, I believe. And Charlie Fisher left a head coaching job to come work for Herm Edwards, be the wide receivers coach. ASU continuously promoted the fact that it coached back-to-back, or it produced back-to-back first-round receivers in the NFL draft. The irony in that was, while they were promoting it, they had fired Charlie Fisher, along with Rob Likens, along with Donnie Yontis. They moved on from a lot of these guys so that, and they left Antonio Pierce, an assistant coach, in charge of the hiring and firing. And that gets us to one of the most shocking things. And it has to do with Prentice Gill, who came over as an Oregon assistant, came over to work for Arizona State as a wide receivers coach. One of the more shocking reveals comes from Prentice Gill's cooperation with the NCAA. So let's get into Prentice Gill. Prentice Gill stated in his interview with the enforcement staff that although the staff members were doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, Antonio Pierce was the quarterback of the whole thing. When asked if Pierce ever inquired about how the prospects arrived on campus, Gill reiterated that Pierce knew they were visiting because he was responsible for organizing 90% of the visits. So when the NCAA asked, hey, what did Antonio Pierce say when he found out that recruits were visiting campus when they weren't supposed to? Prentice Gill says, well, he organized it, so what would he say? He knows. Chris Hawkins, who is young defensive backs coach, very young defensive backs coach, one of the youngest in all of college football, the son of Armand Hawkins, who runs Ground Zero, a very successful 7-on-7 organization, has access to a lot of really talented kids out in Southern California. Chris Hawkins talked as well because ASU fired Chris Hawkins, just like they fired Prentice Gill. He identified Antonio Pierce as the central figure in the scheme, saying in his interview that Antonio Pierce let the staff members know which prospects he wanted to see. Then it was Hawkins and the other staff members' job to get a kid and his family to agree to visit, even though they weren't supposed to. Once they agreed to come out, they would just hand the prospect and the family off to Antonio Pierce, and he would take care of the rest. So instead of Pierce doing this himself, he's having his assistants bait the hook, hook the fish, reel it in, and then hand it off. So prior to several of the visits, Antonio Pierce arranged and financed prospects' airfares. This is thousands of dollars. He also paid for their lodging, and he did this in collaboration with Regina Jackson, the mother of quarterback Jaden Daniels, who eventually went on to win the Heisman for LSU. In Chris Hawkins' interview, he said that Regina Jackson would use her credit card to book flights and lodging for prospects. Then Antonio Pierce would reimburse Jaden Daniels' mother, Regina Jackson, in cash. So Antonio Pierce hands the cash over to Regina Jackson. She pays off her credit card. Now, if you remember, Regina Jackson made the mistake of talking to Yahoo when they tried to reach out to her. And she said that the one instance they had of a recruit's airfare on her credit card was fraudulent and that she got the credit card company to reverse the charge. So if that actually happened, Regina Daniels, in an effort to cover up for Antonio Pierce, admitted to credit card fraud to Yahoo. which is one of the most wild, unaddressed things in this entire situation. So Antonio Pierce is working with Jaden Daniels' mother, Regina Jackson. She's booking things on her credit card. He's paying back in cash. Prentice Gill and another unnamed assistant corroborated the arrangement during their interviews with the enforcement staff. Moreover, the unnamed assistant stated that he learned from other Arizona State football staff members, including Antonio Pierce, that it was best to operate through third parties and not do things personally to create, quote, plausible deniability, unquote. Whether directly or indirectly, Pierce paid for the round-trip airfare and or lodging of at least 7 prospects and some of their family members. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and say, because Antonio Pierce didn't provide financial records to the NCAA, and honestly, like, what motivation would he have to do so? I completely understand why he did not. We don't actually know how much that was. We just have it based on the cooperating assistants. So, during the visits, Antonio Pierce interacted with prospects and their families on 20 separate occasions. Many of these interactions occurred when Pierce conducted tryouts or arranged social gatherings. So he's having kids fly out, they go to the park and they work out. During COVID, he's also taking them to like gun ranges and bowling and Topgolf. Antonio Pierce is one of the most recognizable sports figures in the entire Valley. And he's just out here showing his face along with recruits, expecting not to get caught. And that is very, very, very funny to me. It shows that while this is a scheme, we are not dealing with a super high IQ individual. So the fact that he's just brazenly doing this out in the open, very funny to me. Not a lot of effort to cover their tracks on this. Involved way too many people, and then promised protection for these people that he did not deliver on. So let's get into some of the specifics of these visits. July 10th, 2020, Antonio Pierce and other members of the football staff engaged in activities with 4 prospects at Arizona State's campus. Over the course of the weekend, Antonio Pierce arranged 2 social gatherings for the prospects and their families at an off-campus rental. During those gatherings, Pierce socialized with the prospects and their family members and gave them a free meal. That same weekend, Antonio Pierce conducted a tryout with 4 of the prospects near the Arizona Cardinals National Football League training facility. That's in Tempe. Pierce also took the prospects to a gun range, and then he gave one of the prospects and his mother a tour of Arizona State's football facility, where Pierce had them meet Herm Edwards during like a very obvious COVID dead period. Like, we're talking 3 months into the pandemic, 3.5 months into the pandemic. Antonio Pierce is delivering a recruit and his parent to Herm Edwards at Arizona State's facility. Later that month, Antonio Pierce, Anthony Garnett, and other staff members host 2 more prospects. And that weekend, they go to a local park. They do another tryout. And then, so Anthony Garnett's throwing footballs to one of the prospects. They show video to Prentice Gill. He testifies to that. And the next day, Pierce and staff members get them all together for another social gathering at an off-campus rental where they were staying for free. And then you get to October of 2020, which was, I believe, ASU got back to practice. There was a October 9th. There's a video of Herm Edwards in a bucket hat on Twitter talking about ASU getting back to practice. So during that weekend, Antonio Pierce and other staff members, and this is fall 2020, in the middle of the COVID season where ASU is already missing games, right? Antonio Pierce arranges for 10 prospects and their families to come to Arizona State. They stay at an off-campus rental for 2 nights. They take them bowling. They take them to an arcade. And then Antonio Pierce pays for all of that. And then Antonio Pierce gets together with Jaden Daniels' mom, Regina Jackson, arranges a social gathering for everybody. And then after that, Antonio Pierce, Regina Jackson, Anthony Garnett, and another staff member who was not a coach go to a strip club, and they order a female recruiting staff member to drive them. She testifies to the NCAA that she doesn't want to go. And she said, and it says that they tell her they're going to be drinking, so you just need to get in the van and drive and be our designated driver. So then this female recruiting staff member testifies to the NCAA that she hung out outside the strip club for 90 minutes while Antonio Pierce, Anthony Garnett, Regina Jackson, and a prospect's parents hung out in the strip club for an hour and a half. The next thing that they talk about is March of 2021. And there's been a lot talked about the March 2021 because they flew in some people from Miami, Florida. Now, who did they fly in? These were commits that they got from Hollandale. What's wild is that these players, I believe, all committed to Arizona State on March 21st. So they came out, they visited Arizona State during a dead period on spring break, and then they committed to Arizona State. So these two players from Hollandale High School in Miami, they come to Arizona State, everything's paid for, they go to a bowling alley, they go to an arcade, they end up committing, and then they're back in Miami, and then 2 months after they commit, Chris Hawkins, Antonio Pierce, and Anthony Garnett fly to Miami to hang out with them. They fly out to Miami to hang out with kids that are already committed. My guess is they just wanted to go to Miami because there's not a reason to go hang out with recruits that have already committed to your program. So I just that one is my favorite. And in this process, Anthony Garnett and Antonio Pierce, they go on a little tour. They hit St. Louis, and they hit, I believe, Des Moines, Iowa, and they're hanging out with prospects. And so then you get into the fact that there was actually some discord in this entire thing, because Prentice Gill starts to talk about what it was like to work in this situation for Herm Edwards, but actually be under Antonio Pierce, who is the assistant head coach. He is on the defensive side of the ball, but he is in charge of the wide receivers coach. So here's what Prentice Gill had to say. And this one just reaffirms a lot of what people have said about Arizona State and the Herm Edwards era. Prentice Gill emphasized Antonio Pierce's level of control over the staff, saying that Antonio Pierce, quote, ran the show. To highlight this dynamic, Prentice Gill pointed to the fact that he never spoke to Herm Edwards during his hiring process and only met him on his second day of employment at Arizona State. So in Prentice Gill's mind, Antonio Pierce was the head coach because, again, he had already had the job before he met Herm Edwards, the head coach of the program. Already had the job, replacing one of Herm Edwards' personal friends who left a head coaching job to take that wide receiver coach position. So Prentice Gill also said that he was, quote, slammed, like criticized, on a number of occasions from Antonio Pierce about just getting the job done. Now, this is a reference to recruiting. For Prentice Gill, he said his pressure to comply with Pierce's directives stemmed from a fear that he would be terminated if he did not secure prospects. Remember, Antonio Pierce fired Donnie Yontis. He got rid of all the people that weren't that he didn't have the ability to control in that. Charlie Fisher, Rob Likens. So Hawkins added that Chris Hawkins added that he and Prentice Gill were in a unique position as Pierce's first two hires upon being promoted to associate head coach. From Chris Hawkins' perspective, Pierce believed that he and Prentice Gill were going to do exactly as Pierce instructed in exchange for the opportunity that he had been given. So a quid pro quo. Like Prentice Gill, Chris Hawkins felt that he had to abide by what Antonio Pierce's rules were. That's a direct quote. Because Antonio Pierce said Chris Hawkins would be terminated if he did not participate in the illegal unofficial visits. Chris Hawkins recalled the pressure of being the only coach on staff with a one-year contract, combined with being one of the youngest coaches in the country, running a position group, and he felt like he, quote, just had to do everything in his power to keep his job. So, I mean, and this was pointed out a lot, that Antonio Pierce was basically running the show. And I'm going to pause here to just say that a lot of this has to do with Ray Anderson and an absolutely insane scheme to replace an acting head coach, keep the entire staff together, replace the head coach, and give him zero responsibility, zero position groups to work with, and say that, we're going to bring somebody in, pay them millions of dollars, not give them a specific job, but because they're a classy individual that has a stellar reputation, we're going to let him be in charge. We're going to pay him millions to be the face of the program while everybody else works. Now, Phil Bennett, the defensive coordinator at the time, was like, hell no. My back hurts. I'm not doing this. I'm going to go take a year off and get surgery. Billy Napier, who, they could have just given the job to him, said, no way, I'm going to go take the head coaching job at Louisiana Monroe. And so you have Herm Edwards, who was not supposed to have any responsibilities whatsoever. All of a sudden, he has to find a defensive coordinator. He has to find an offensive coordinator. So what they do is they promote Rob Likens for the time being. And then, Antonio Pierce is brought in as linebackers coach. Antonio Pierce, in my opinion, fairly quickly realizes Herm Edwards has literally no idea what he's doing and no plan to actually commit to the process of making this happen. So Herm Edwards is still getting up at 4:30 in the morning and working out to jazz music. No respect for the schedule of the head coach, the fact that you're going to be kicking off at 8 p.m. sometimes. He's still fulfilling all of his radio obligations all over the country, calling into Kansas City radio stations to talk Chiefs football when he should be in charge of Arizona State's recruiting. And I think Antonio Pierce sees that and he's like, what the hell? And he took the wheel. I do not blame Antonio Pierce for taking the wheel. I do not. Now, what he did with the wheel once he had it, he deserves all of this scrutiny. And he's in a really blessed position to be the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders right now. So it doesn't really feel like there's been much of a penalty, but he's got enough other stuff going on in his personal life. He's getting sued for like $38 million. His wife had to declare bankruptcy because supposedly he didn't tell her that he was the guarantor on all of these loans that were not paid back. And now their marital assets are at stake. He's got his own issues. It's not like his life is perfect. But at the same time, he has not been punished, and he's probably not going to be punished for this. It's one of those things where, like, if you ever come home, you're grounded. Well, I'm not coming home then. So, to get back to it, on the trip to Miami, right? So Chris Hawkins goes to visit prospects who were already committed in Miami. Chris Hawkins says about that, when Antonio Pierce came and told me I was going to Florida, he didn't ask me, he told me. When he said we were going to Iowa, he didn't ask me, he told me. And now multiple people said that Anthony Garnett was actually the primary recruiter of the two involved prospects in Florida. And he had a relationship with their high school coach. So, and then Antonio Pierce also dimed out Anthony Garnett, which is funny because Anthony Garnett posted on Twitter today that some people fold and some people stay solid. So Anthony Garnett is like bragging about not diming out anybody on the staff, but Antonio Pierce confirmed that he was involved. So, and then the prospects also said that Garnett was out there in Florida observing their workouts or had contact with them out there in Miami. And again, this is not an assistant that has the ability to be traveling. And it was also a time when you were not supposed to travel at all. So it's very funny to me that Anthony Garnett is proud of himself for not diming out a guy who turned on him. Very, very funny. As far as the text messages go, there was a week-long exchange with an assistant coach. And again, this assistant coach is not named, so you can make an assumption here that there were 46 text messages and one phone call over the course of a week to try to convince somebody to transfer to Arizona State. This assistant coach says that he and the other staff members knew that the prospect was not in the portal, but despite that, the assistant said that he felt pressured by Antonio Pierce to get the prospect to transfer to Arizona State in whatever way he had to. The assistant recalled the pressure stemming from Pierce's, quote, willingness to let people go and fire or not hire people based on their performance in recruiting. And it says prior to his employment being finalized, so this unnamed assistant, prior to his employment being finalized, Antonio Pierce sent the unnamed assistant a text message saying, close the prospect, make it happen. Pierce then sent a message saying it would further cement you as being the new staff member, most likely the tight ends coach. Wink, wink. And then some of this gets into the NCAA's back and forth with Pierce after he had left Arizona State. So it talks about throughout his March 29th, 2023 interview. So Pierce did not sit down with the NCAA for like almost 2 years. He had said he acknowledged some of the facts around the case, and that there were a number of prospects on Arizona State's campus. And Antonio Pierce said the reason that he did it was other institutions were doing it too. So he said he knew the rules and he tried to keep up with the Joneses, and he broke the rules to do it. He said, I'm straightforward. I broke the rules to do it. The NCAA says, notwithstanding Antonio Pierce's concessions, he consistently denied planning or arranging any portion of the prospect's visits. So Antonio Pierce tells the NCAA, all these kids just keep showing up illegally, so I had to take care of them, which is very, very funny. He said that he only showed up to the events, the social events, to meet prospects. And if it was a tryout in a park, he only showed up to watch a little bit. So these non-confessions are very funny to me. There's that Simpsons line where it's like, I was only there to get directions on how to get away from there. That's what this reminds me of. So he said, I didn't organize any of this, but I did show up to the events and I did show up to the tryouts. I was only watching a little bit. I was only meeting the prospects. He denied having any knowledge of anyone getting anything paid for. And Antonio Pierce said that he believes that Prentice Gill, Chris Hawkins, or the unnamed assistant must have used their own credit cards to pay all those expenses. And he vehemently denied reimbursing them. He said he did not give any money to anybody. So the NCAA then said, on March 30th, 2023 and April 28th, 2023, they said, okay, cool. Just give us your bank records for these specific dates so that we can corroborate that you did not reimburse any of these expenses. Antonio Pierce did not respond to either request. So the NCAA asked Antonio Pierce if he traveled to Florida to visit prospects. Antonio Pierce said he did not. He asked the NCAA asked Antonio Pierce if he knew that coaches were attending a prospects track meet in Iowa. And Antonio Pierce said that, yeah, he knew that there were 2 staff members that went on that trip. The NCAA did not ask if he went to Iowa or he went to Missouri, and Antonio Pierce didn't bring it up. So the NCAA didn't dig too much into everything. Anthony Garnett did respond, and it really is starting to seem like Anthony Garnett was the one who they were really waiting on because he was implicated in so many of these things. So April 3rd, 2024, that is 6 months ago, exactly 6 months ago, Anthony Garnett wrote a response to the notice of allegations, and he acknowledged that he worked out with a prospect. He denied directing anyone to provide transportation to the strip club, which he was accused of by a female recruiting staff member. He admitted to being at the strip club. He said, and this is awesome, Anthony Garnett said that even though he was at the strip club with recruits' parents, he did not socialize with them while they were there. Incredible. Just an incredible statement to the NCAA. They said that he appeared to acknowledge that he interacted with 3 prospects when they toured Arizona State's facility and visited a bowling alley. And he said that as far as the Miami recruits, he went to Miami without any, no one at ASU told him to. He just traveled to Miami himself. And he had given a previous interview in February 2023 to the NCAA. In that interview, he said he didn't remember having any knowledge of anything. And in this written response, he said he went to Miami. He admitted going to Miami, but he said that it was, of his own accord. So the NCAA takes all of this information, and this is where they really break down what violations were committed. I don't find that to be something that we need to go over in explicit detail. We're already 49 minutes into this podcast talking about this 67-page report. And so they also give a lot of precedent for what the violations are. They relate them to other cases that have happened at Ohio State, and other things to justify the violations that they gave. And they quote Antonio Pierce, and they say that he didn't fund anything and that he didn't give anybody money. But Antonio Pierce's position was contradicted by multiple staff members' interview statements. So the panel decided that his statements were not credible. And so that basically, even though he didn't participate, enough people testified against him that they are counting that as true. Here is what the NCAA knows for sure. In May 2021, Antonio Pierce, Anthony Garnett, Chris Hawkins, they all went to Miami, Florida. They visited 2 prospects. They had in-person contact with the prospects. Then they went to Missouri. Then they went to Des Moines, Iowa. Same issue. Had contact with prospects on those trips. And the justification for some of the violations associated with those was based on the fact that Air Force got caught doing something similar, and so they related the violations they gave to Air Force to the violations they gave to Arizona State. Now, they have the text messages that unnamed assistant sent to a 4-year college prospect who is not in the transfer portal. And they have proof that Antonio Pierce directed the assistant to send those texts. So they do have some proof there. And they relate that to a Cal State University Northridge issue and a Sam Houston State issue that they've already ruled on in order to give those violations. And then they really hammer anybody who didn't cooperate or who they believe gave false statements. So the people who did not cooperate, whether that's the equipment manager Bowman, Derek Hagan, that they all got serious violations for refusing to participate in this at all. They do say that Antonio Pierce admitted to having in-person recruiting contact with all of these recruits, but he denied having any involvement in how they got there, denied paying anything back. And he said that he didn't go to Miami, that he didn't go to St. Louis, that he didn't go to Des Moines. So he got caught in some lies there. So that was an issue. And then there was a lot of failure to cooperate that came up as well. So this 67-page report really deals with the individual penalties. We already know what the penalties were for Arizona State. Those have been levied. We're kind of almost out of the dark on those. It's still in probation, I believe. Scholarship limit's about to go back to where it should be. But yeah, the biggest ability that they have to enforce seems to be non-participation. And so this show cause order for Antonio Pierce, it's 8 years of a show cause. And if he gets a job coaching college football in any capacity, he has to spend the entire first year suspended. So the motivation for a staff to want to even bring him in is going to be minimal. Same with Anthony Garnett, who I believe went to coach at Bennett State or something like that. I don't know what he's doing now, except for tweeting about how great he is for for standing on business or whatever. Even though his own, the coach that he was trying to protect dimed him out. And so, there's all of these bylaws about honesty and recruit and prohibited activities, unethical conduct. They list out all of the violations, and it's not good. And so pretty much here is everybody who was penalized and what for. Herm Edwards penalized, Prentice Gill, the former wide receivers coach, Chris Hawkins, former defensive backs coach, former offensive coordinator Zach Hill, another former assistant coach who is unnamed, and additionally, Eric Bowman, the former assistant equipment manager, Derek Hagan, the former assistant football coach and former ASU wide receiver, and then defensive line coach Rob Rodriguez, because they were non-participating parties, they got hit with a ton of violations. So, I mean, that's that. That brings us to the very end of this. They talk about Herm Edwards it's almost sad in the way that they talk about it. And I'll get to that in a second. I'm going to read you a couple of things that I thought were that were part of the negotiated resolution that I think you should know. This was one of them was a tampering violation. So in addition to the COVID-19 recruiting dead period violations, Antonio Pierce directed a former assistant football coach to impermissibly contact a four-year prospective student, even though he's not in the transfer portal. So he got hit with the tampering violation there. And then as far as unethical conduct, Prentice Gill, Chris Hawkins, and Antonio Pierce, it says that they knowingly arranged and provided impermissible inducements, transportation, lodging, meals, entertainment, and gear. So they just all of it. You know, the only thing they don't have proof of is bags of cash. And then here's the section on head coaching responsibility. And it's a little bit sad. Due to the extensive violations that occurred within the football program and Herm Edwards' direct personal involvement in some of those violations, Herm Edwards could not rebut the presumption of responsibility by demonstrating he promoted an atmosphere of compliance or adequately monitored his staff. Herm Edwards made efforts to promote compliance through weekly meetings between the football and compliance staffs, but Herm Edwards' knowing participation in some NCAA rules violations involving contacts with prospective student athletes demonstrates that his compliance efforts were inadequate and that he failed to lead by example. Edwards was unaware of many of the NCAA rules violations committed by the football staff and trusted his staff to follow NCAA rules without verifying their compliance. But Edwards did also not ask pointed questions or follow up on red flags that should have alerted him to potential violations within the football program. To his credit, Herm Edwards acknowledged the violations and took responsibility for his staff's conduct during the investigation. Herm Edwards explained that his personal involvement in certain NCAA rules violations was motivated by his desire to assuage the concerns of prospective student athletes and their family members about the present and future impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. Herm Edwards also acknowledged that his motives did not excuse his violations and that some violations were intended to gain a recruiting advantage. So, let's sum this up in one sentence. Herm Edwards participated in recruiting violations. One of the excuses he gave for his participation was he just wanted to let people know everything's going to be okay. But he also admitted that some of his motives were that he wanted to gain a competitive edge. Guys, that means that not only did Herm Edwards know, he admitted knowing. His best friend who hired him knew that he knew that he admitted it, knew what he testified to the NCAA, and still bought him out for $4.4 million instead of firing him for cause. It is extremely important. Inquiring minds want to know, why would Arizona State buy out somebody who is guilty? And I think deep down, we all know the answer. I think deep down, we all understand that a man who is co-teaching a class at ASU right now and still absorbing his high six-figure salary for doing so after abdicating his role as the athletic director at Arizona State might have had some involvement in all this. It's fair to assume. It is absolutely fair to assume. So, that's the report. A lot of people are in a lot of trouble. Some people participated. One person got immunity. One person is on Twitter right now patting themselves on the back for only halfway participating, even though his coach dimed him out. And then the only other thing that I find very, very interesting about this entire report is it lists all of the restaurants that they went to. And I have to tell you, at least the coaching staff had good taste. They took a lot of these kids to Chompy's. Rest in peace, Chompy's in Tempe. one of my favorite places. They took a lot of recruits to Chompies. They also went to Buffalo Wild Wings and other various places. But Chompies, great choice. If you're going to commit an NCAA violation by providing an inducement to a recruit and their families, you got to get some of those potato pancakes. Trust me, I fully understand what they were trying to do there. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else to say about this. I think it kind of closes the chapter. People have every right to be mad at Antonio Pierce. Should probably recognize that the only reason that Antonio Pierce was in the position that he was is because Ray Anderson had zero respect for the football program and practiced one of the most blatant examples of cronyism of all time to put somebody who was ill prepared, had no intention of ever doing what it took to get himself prepared, and abdicated all of his responsibilities to somebody who had a very, very long history of questionable professional and personal behavior. You look up the Plaxico Burress incident, you look up Antonio Pierce neglecting his own dogs. You look at the fact that Long Beach Poly ended up on probation where he was the head coach. You look at the fact that he sent out a gambling tweet, sponsorship tweet on the day of his hiring by Arizona State that he had to take down. You look at the car dealerships, which Arizona State was well aware of, and the fraud that was perpetrated by Antonio Pierce and his fellow investors upon both the loan institutions as well as the people that were purchasing the cars. And you say, wow, Herm Edwards really put this man in charge of everything, and it went exactly the way that you think that it might go. So, there are some people who did not participate at all. Derek Hagan, I hate that for him. He coached at Arizona State, he coached at Portland State, and now they're saying he's got a 10-year show cause through April 14th, 2034. That sucks for him. Prentice Gill's show cause, he's working in the NFL now, but it's through 2029. Herm Edwards is through 2029. He never had any business in college football. Anyway, he'll never be back, so you don't have to worry about that. The assistant, this is probably kind of the funny one. The assistant equipment manager got an 8-year show cause. I doubt he ever works in this industry ever again. I'm sure there are plenty of industries where you can give out free swag that he can involve himself in. Chris Hawkins, he's show cause through 2028. It's pretty unfortunate. And then you have to assume that Zach Hill did a pretty good job cooperating, because his show cause is only 3 years. And they don't mention his name a whole lot in this report. But it's also possible he wasn't involved in as many things. And so, if he does come back to the college level after leaving the Seahawks for any reason, he's subject to a show cause penalty through April 14th, 2027. And then Rob Rodriguez, who I believe is coaching with the Arizona Cardinals, got hit with a show cause through April 14th, 2032. Who knows what his involvement even was, because he had no reason in his mind to talk to the NCAA whatsoever. So those are the negotiated resolutions from the notice of allegations. This is the full report talking about, who talked, who didn't, who lied, who didn't participate. And hopefully that means that we can just move on. And the entire report ends with just the most Pollyanna paragraph ever. The Committee on Infractions advises Arizona State, Bowman, Edwards, Gill, Hagan, Hawkins, Hill, and Rodriguez that they should take every precaution to ensure that if they observe the terms of the penalties. The Committee on Infractions will monitor the institution while it is on probation to ensure compliance with the penalties and terms of probation, and may extend the probationary period, among other actions, if the institution does not comply or commits additional violations. Likewise, any action by the institution or Bowman or Edwards or Gill or Hagan or Hawkins or Hill or Rodriguez, contrary to the terms, could increase their violations. So the NCAA is telling people now, don't you do that again to a bunch of people who have no intention of coming back to this industry whatsoever anyway. And, that's a big part of it taking as long as it took. A lot of the people seeing the writing on the wall and leaving the institution holding the bag for their misdeeds. Now, As an Arizona State fan, I accept that Arizona State was involved in all this. I was one of those people when Herm Edwards was hired that was like, he needs to get up to speed. And, there's a clip that Jordan Ham tweeted out from his introductory press conference answering a Doug Holler question. Ironically, Doug Holler broke this story of, how are you going to get up to date on rules violations? And Herm Edwards saying, you don't have to worry about any rules violations from me. I'm from a military family. So this entire thing is just, Herm Edwards, he's never going to have to answer for any of this. And neither is Antonio Pierce. And Arizona State's left holding the bag, and it is what it is. And it just comes down to, how long do you want to hold this grudge? I'm a grudge holder. I'm gonna hold it for a while. Mine is primarily directed to Ray Anderson. I think that Herm Edwards is exactly who we thought he was. And, this was a situation where it was a skill issue, not necessarily a will issue. Do I think Herm Edwards wanted to commit a bunch of NCAA violations? No. Do I think Herm Edwards had the ability to not be in this situation? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's one of the most ludicrous hires in the history of college football. Remains so. Will always remain so. And that's one of the things that always frustrated me about this hire, is that Ray Anderson made a name for himself helping break up the good old boys network and the glass ceiling that precluded so many talented Black coaches from being able to reach the highest position in this sport, something that they'd earned through their participation, something that they'd earned through their blood, sweat, and tears as assistants, something that they'd earned through innovations on the offensive and defensive side of the football. Ray Anderson, as an agent, helped break all of that up. He got jobs for, some coaches who are going to go down in NFL history as, not only as part of the fabric of the NFL, but having done things that some coaches had never done before. And then the moment that Ray Anderson got into a position of power, he became the thing that he helped break up and used it as an opportunity to fill Arizona State with people that he was friends with, because he didn't want to admit that maybe he needed help. Maybe he needed some consultants. Maybe he needed to go outside of his network to find the right person for the job in any given situation. Ray Anderson became the thing that he fought against. And it's, to people that care, it's going to tarnish his legacy. It's going to tarnish Herm's legacy forever. And think about Herm Edwards. Think about, Herm Edwards travels to Bristol. He leaves his family behind to stay there 4 or 5 days at a time. It's what he did before he became the coach of Arizona State. And he has to be out there on ESPN talking about Jaden Daniels on the Commanders and what could have been, talking about Antonio Pierce, who betrayed him, being the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, knowing that his credibility is shot, knowing that it's only people who didn't follow this situation closely that believe that his platitudes on the NFL have any substance to them whatsoever. And he's going to become a lonely, rambling old man, a shell of himself, unable to point to the potential good that he could have done at the college level. Ray Anderson, anytime he is brought up in this state, the state that he said that he loves to live in so much because of its warmth, certainly not the warmth of the people toward him, but the warmth of the sun, and Michael Crow has his back still to this day for absolutely no reason, to the detriment of Arizona State University, which Michael Crow is supposed to shepherd and protect. He has that, but he has no credibility with anybody, boosters, former employees. Everybody's glad to be rid of him. Everyone's glad to be rid of him. His legacy, shot. Herm Edwards' legacy, shot. And then Herm Edwards and Ray Anderson have to look at the fact, everything that they've done for Marvin Lewis. Everything that they've done for Marvin Lewis. And at the end of the day, Marvin Lewis knows the lengths that Antonio Pierce went to betray his friend Herm Edwards, the one who, against advice, against better sense, against better judgment, gave him an opportunity to be a collegiate position coach and promoted him up through the ranks. That Antonio Pierce did all of that to his friend Herm Edwards, and by extension to Ray Anderson and their legacies. And Herm Edwards has to look at that and see that Marvin Lewis his friend, and Ray Anderson has to look at that and see Marvin Lewis, his friend and former client, knows everything that Antonio Pierce did to them and their legacies. And that at the end of the day, Marvin Lewis just wants to be a football coach and went to work for Antonio Pierce. They have to stomach that. Alone at night when it's quiet, that's what they're thinking about. So the punishment might not be sufficient for Arizona State fans, but I promise you, this broke those men. It broke those men. And I probably have the least amount of ire for Antonio Pierce, who has just never really been held accountable and is overall a completely ridiculous person. Far more concerned with the branding than the substance of the opportunities that he's been given. But I'm not mad at him. I'm going to make fun of him for the rest of my life because it's funny to me. That's the way that I'm going to cope. And we all have to cope. And, they can laugh at us that they left us behind with all this damage. All we really have to do on our end is we have the ability to point the finger and laugh. So I'm going to laugh at Antonio Pierce for the rest of his career in football at any level. That's what I'm going to do. Because it's funny. Assuming he doesn't get himself in some other kind of trouble. I remember watching the Firefest documentary with Billy McFarland, one of the greatest frauds perpetrated on the privileged youth of America, perpetrated by Billy McFarland and Ja Rule. And in this documentary, a shot of Antonio Pierce hanging out with Billy McFarland. Because of course. Because of course. And I don't want tragedy to befall this man, but if by some circumstance the consequences of his actions continue to provide to be a thorn in his own side, so be it. Not going to shed a tear. Not at all. Because Arizona State, a program I love, a school I love, had to go through a whole hell of a lot just so that, because Antonio Pierce didn't trust his own ability to be legit. Because Antonio Pierce's self-confidence does not match his self-image. Because what Antonio Pierce portrays himself to be publicly on his Instagram, the Suge Knight of football, Death Row Dan Campbell, as my guy George Reister calls him, he doesn't even have the confidence to try to do it legit because he knows he can't. His self-confidence and self-image rival the Grand Canyon. And he has to live with that as well. He knows he's pretending, and he knows it'll catch up to him. And you'll see that reflected in how things go with the Raiders. I believe that. He's already losing Devontae Adams. He's already talking about cutting people in the middle of the season. All he needed was a public-facing position for the rest of the world to see him the way that Arizona State does. And with that, we close the chapter on the NCAA investigation into Arizona State athletics under Herm Edwards. Next up, let's preview Kansas. So I'm going to be honest, I like Kansas. I've always liked Kansas. It's fellow Adidas school, so no free advertising or whatever, but the Jayhawks, when I was a kid, they had Jock Vaughn, Scott Pollard, Greg Ostertag, probably one of the best teams to not actually win an NCAA tournament. I thought Roy Williams was one of the best basketball coaches alive. Really, really enjoyed him as a coach. And, they were always in the mix. I loved the colors. For some reason, I was obsessed. And I know that people are going to say, yeah, well, U of A's red, white, and blue, but not this color, red, white, and blue. I was obsessed with the mid-90s Philadelphia 76ers, like the 27 and 55 Dana Barros, Clarence Weatherspoon, Sean Bradley 76ers, who just sucked, right? But I love their color scheme. I love their jerseys. I used to sit and just draw Kansas players and draw 76ers players. And maybe I only owned like 3 crayons or something. And that's why I did this. But I had a Kansas Jayhawks basketball, and I had a neighbor who was really into Gale Sayers. Like, had an autographed photo of him and knew that Gale Sayers had gone to Kansas. Mistakenly, for the longest time, I thought that John Riggins was a Sun Devil. He's not. He's a Jayhawk. And so, I followed Kansas sports. I knew their football team stunk, but, I really, really enjoyed watching Kansas basketball as a kid. So it has always kind of been the Big 12 university that I rooted for from afar. And that was really tough over the last 10 years because Charlie Weiss bottomed out that football program so bad. I think at one point they lost 70 of 80. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Like, we just went through 2 years of lose one or win one, lose three. We just went through 2 years of win one, lose three, right? 3-9, 2 seasons in a row. It felt like hell. They were win one, lose seven. they were more than twice as bad, and it went on for an entire decade. And so, I always kind of had a soft spot for what they had to climb back out of. They had the David Beatty years, and David Beatty is on that Todd Graham coaching tree, and so kind of rooted for him a little bit. And then they've gotten to turn things around under Lance Leipold. So I paid attention to them. They also recruit in the state of Arizona. I cover Arizona high school football. There's currently 4 kids who are, part of Kansas's roster. And then they had Azura Kamara back in the day. And then they had Kwame Lassiter's kid. And one of the teams, my favorite teams of all time, is the 1998 Arizona Cardinals. Kwame Lassiter was part of that team. Pat Tillman, Jake Plummer, Larry Centers, who, the Arizona Cardinals not honoring him, it makes them a worse organization than a Herm Edwards led ASU team. But, that's all besides the point. I like Kansas. I've always liked Kansas. Wouldn't call myself a fan, but maybe more of an admirer. I was genuinely shocked to find out that Arizona State and Kansas have not played ever, like, not once. And so it's going to be very, very cool to witness essentially history, especially when witnessing history doesn't involve anything political or military, because it seems like a lot of that's been happening lately. So to just witness a sports first is going to be a lot of fun. And there's going to be some PTSD, I think, for Arizona State fans when a team comes to town and their quarterback's name is Jay Daniels and he's throwing a bunch of picks in a year where they were expected to be a lot better than they actually are. I watched 3 Kansas games this morning. I watched their game against UNLV. I watched their game against Illinois. And I watched their game against West Virginia. These were all losses. They've only beat Lindenwood, which my friend Sherry Brooks told me. I said I didn't know what Lindenwood was. She messaged me to tell me that we play them in hockey. So now I guess I do know who Lindenwood is. But they have 1 win. They're 1-3, on the verge of 1-4 because Arizona State's favored in this game. And there were a lot of expectations. They didn't get any first place votes, I believe, in the Big 12. But I think, that top 5, I think, in predictions. And currently things don't look good. But I will tell you this. They should be 4-0. They really should be 4-0. The issue has been turnovers. The issue has been they are god awful to finish out the first half. Like, cartoonishly bad to finish out the half. They should have beaten Illinois. But I think, I want to say his name is Xavier Howard, had like 3 interceptions and a forced fumble. The forced fumble was on the attempted Hail Mary from Kansas to win the game. They were controlling the game against UNLV before they threw an interception right before halftime. And UNLV, I believe, scored a touchdown, came back out in the second half with all the momentum and ended up winning. And then against West Virginia, that game was in Morgantown. West Virginia players were dropping like flies all game long. Just injury bug really, really affecting West Virginia. And, Kansas had a couple of costly turnovers. And, when the time came, when it came down to it, some of their stars like Devin Neal, they weren't even out on the field. So, this is actually a dangerous team that has been severely underperforming. They are very upset with Jeff Grimes, their offensive coordinator. The fans are. Jeff Grimes came over from Baylor after a really rough year at Baylor last year. But before that, Arizona State fans will remember he was at BYU, and he had a lot of success with Zach Wilson, and he had a lot of success with Jaron Hall. They actually beat Arizona State. People will remember that as the Merlin Robertson double fumble game, where he was returning a fumble and fumbled himself, fumbled the ball back to BYU. So, this is a really good team. They are underperforming. They run the option sometimes, like the pure option. That's fascinating. They have a couple of running backs who run hard. They run hard. Devin Neal is a very dynamic player. And again, I want to say this is a team that went 9-4 last year and came into the season ranked 22nd. And after their victory against Lindenwood, moved into the top 20. Obviously, at 1-4, they're not going to be in anyone's top anything, right? But I'll go through some of the players that you can expect to really want to watch. Daniel Highshaw, their backup running back, he's averaging 7 yards a carry. He runs very, very hard, like a cannonball, right out of the cannon. No nonsense. And he is somebody who could be very dangerous. You have to watch out for. It's not even really a change of pace because Devin Neal's so dynamic. It's rare to see a team be 1-4 when their top 2 running backs are averaging a combined 6.5 yards a carry with almost 800 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns. This is an incredibly dangerous running team. And I haven't even brought up the most dangerous runner, which is their quarterback, Jalen Daniels. But Jalen Daniels, he's having some issues. The ball comes out of his hands slow. Where he actually throws a very catchable ball. The problem is anyone can catch it because he just throws balls up for grabs. He's 69 of 130 this year for 805 yards in 5 games. Not great. 5 touchdowns, 1 touchdown pass a game. He's thrown 8 picks. And that's the reason Arizona State, it's very simple. The reason Arizona State is favored in this game is they have a +5 turnover margin, and Jalen Daniels has thrown 8 interceptions by himself. The offensive line, not blocking well, but you also have somebody who is incredibly active, will get out of the pocket, and will disrupt the blocking himself. So you have to watch out for that. They're good on the edge on defense. They're really good on the edge on defense. I think that could create some issues for Arizona State. Jeremy Robinson, great pass rusher, has about 3.5 sacks already. J.B. Brown has 2 sacks. They can get you from anywhere. They're not incredibly deep on defense, but that starting 11 is very talented, and they're most talented at the corner position. Kobe Bryant, yes, that is his name. Yes, he leans into it. He says, "Call me Mamba." So you're going to want to watch out for number 6, Kobe Bryant. Can't miss him because he has Bryant on his jersey, and his name is Kobe, and you will be thinking about it all game long, I guarantee you. But I don't even think he's their best corner because Romello Dotson has 3 interceptions. He's got 24 solo tackles, so he's given up some catches, but he's on you. Romello Dotson and Kobe Bryant, very, very talented cornerbacks. Very talented. Now, will that even factor in for Arizona State? That's probably my biggest question. Arizona State has completed 33 passes to wide receivers this season. That's an average of 8 a game. We are not using the wide receiver position. Criminally underutilizing the wide receiver position. Our entire offense has really run through Cam Scatterbo. I love that he's had 2 weeks to rest after we gave him 2011 carries over the previous couple of games. I'm not going to get too much into the loss against Texas Tech because it's been a couple of weeks now. But I felt like Arizona State, for the most part, was in control of that game for 54 minutes. And it just happened to be that the first 6 minutes we fell into a 14-0 hole. So it doesn't matter that you outscore your opponent 22-16 over 90% of the game because of what happened in the first 6 minutes, including some ridiculous penalties, a turnover, all that. So, Arizona State with 2 weeks to prepare for Kansas, I think could be a good thing. My hope is that they utilize the wide receiver position, but there's no guarantee they'll even be able to because Kansas's strength defensively is their corners who play in man. And I went on a podcast this week, the Rock Chalk podcast on the 1012 network. Shout out to Andy Mitz. Went on that podcast and he told me, I explained to him that what I believed could stop Arizona State. If I was trying to stop Arizona State, I would throw the kitchen sink at Cam Scatterbo because we run our offense through Cam Scatterbo. I would not be afraid to give up big passing plays. Even if we did, I don't personally believe I would change anything about the way defense is played because Sam Levitt is 3 for 20 on throws beyond 20 yards. So I would play man and I would stack the box. And I would say, all right, freshman quarterback, beat me. And if he beats me, I would say, bet you can't do it twice. And I would stick with that through the entire game. And what Andy Mitz told me is, they will stack the box and they do play a lot of man, but they give receivers cushion. And that makes me wonder, will Arizona State take the opportunity to get some players involved on some bubble screens? To get the ball into the hands of Stovall, of Jake Smith, of Xavier Guillory, of Jordan Tyson. These guys should be averaging 3-4 catches a game, not 8 combined. And on top of that, they have other receivers that need to get involved as well. You can't have 9 talented receivers on the roster, have them split 8 catches between them per game, and not expect the entire roster to transfer out. Kenny Dillingham has said a lot about getting Sam Leavitt in a rhythm, but he's not the only person you need to get in a rhythm. Your other players matter too. All players matter, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, that being said, talk to Andy Mitz on the Rock Chalk podcast. I said, if I was going to beat Arizona State, here's what I would do. Stack the box, play man, and if we get burned, I don't care. Run it back. Pressure the guy, force him out of the pocket. He doesn't protect himself when he's out of the pocket, so then, deliver a hit if you have the ability to. And he said, he thinks that Kansas is going to do that, but he doesn't necessarily think they're talented enough to force Arizona State into too many mistakes or even really shut down Cam Scatterbo. And that's based on the fact that he's had to endure a 1-4 season thus far. So I said what I would do. He's saying that they're going to do it, and he doesn't necessarily think that they can pull it off. We both kind of agreed that maybe a 28-24 score prediction for Arizona State was reasonable, and Las Vegas agrees. I think at one point at least, Arizona State was favored by 3. So, there are dynamic athletes that you have to worry about on Kansas's offense. Their offensive line hasn't looked great, but when they get out on those options, the outside blocking is fantastic. The downfield blocking is fantastic. The problem is Kansas has given away so many possessions, but still they're in every game. Even though they're trying to give games away and almost failing. That's how good this team has the potential to be. Now, luckily for Arizona State, it's going to be at home. Hopefully the crowd's rocking. I know it's going to be disgusting weather, but you want to use that to your advantage. Kansas will have never played in anything like this, I guarantee you. And even their players from Arizona, they're not necessarily starters yet. So, and you can't pep talk somebody into playing well in 110 degrees. But this is a big game for Arizona State because, Kansas kind of has a different philosophy on recruiting than Arizona State. And because of that, they've been able to land a lot of players out of Arizona because they are willing to provide incentives, which we used to call inducements and used to be illegal. They're able to provide incentives to incoming freshmen, whereas Arizona State's philosophy is come here, earn it, we'll take care of you. And that's just a philosophical difference. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And Kenny Dillingham has even said, if you can leave and get your bag and it doesn't work out, you're good enough, we'll have space for you when you come back. So it's a big deal for Arizona State because they're facing off against a team that has encroached into their recruiting territory and decided that they can come in and get freshmen that maybe Arizona State would want to have themselves. It's going to be important for Arizona State to show out in front of the state of Arizona on a Saturday during the daytime. So, to me, I feel like it is an important game for Arizona State. Of course, it's important. You have a shot at 4-1 when Vegas predicted you to only have 4.5 wins this year. But I'm talking about the importance beyond the win-loss column. It's about flexing on Kansas and saying, hey, you can come in and get some of our kids, but you're still not us. You can come in with preseason hype at number 19, but you're still not us. We're 4-1, you're 1-5. That's what's at stake for Arizona State. Now, I think this is an awesome test for Sam Leavitt because I had written something for Sports 360 AZ before the season, and I believe it, and hopefully I upheld it, that I didn't think you should make any permanent judgments about Sam Leavitt until you're 4 games into the season. Then you can take that data and say, here's what we need to see from here, or we need to see something else. And I think that Sam Leavitt's done enough to deserve a 5th game. A 6th game. I believe that, right? However, I think that you can say, hey, we need to see some accuracy from you. Hey, we need to see you make more than one read. Hey, we need you to protect yourself when you get out on the run. We need these things from you in order to win, and we want to win now. We still have a shot at the Big 12. 0-1's not going to stop Arizona State. 0-2, 0-3, then you got a problem. But you look at the amount of 50-50 games that are still on this schedule. Anything could really happen, and good quarterback play could be the difference. So now it matters. Now you have a quarterback with 4 games experience under his belt, and you can say, okay, based on what we've seen from you, keep doing this. Also, we need this. Keep extending drives with your legs. Keep the energy, keep the attitude, but you got to be accurate. You got to protect yourself. And before you run, you got to stick in the pocket for maybe just a little bit longer, or step up in the pocket to make a throw, so that not everything we do is having you roll out and putting yourself in danger and having your already questionable accuracy dip because you're running out to your left or right. That's what we need from him. We need that tutelage from Marcus Arroyo. This is his hand-picked guy. This is the guy he had the 6-hour meeting with, the most intense recruiting meeting with of all time. This is the reason that Jaden Rashada left. This is the reason that the only quarterback Arizona State has had in the last 4 years to throw for 300 yards or more, who's done it 5 times, is sitting at third string right now. It's for you, Sam. So you have to progress, especially if we want to win now. Because I think everybody, and I've said this a bunch, I'm going to keep saying it, I think everybody is willing to give Kenny Dillingham the grace of saying that this is a 3-year build, because that is what makes sense. That you go 3-9 your first year, you're 12 points away from 6-6, and you were up on another team at halftime in Oklahoma State. 7-5 could have happened last year. You want to get to a bowl game in year 2, or you want to be in contention for a bowl game in year 2. You want to be competitive in conference games. You don't want to get blown out like you were at the end of 2023. And then in year 3, if you can get to double-digit wins, we're on the right path, baby. But there is one very important person to this process that is not interested in a 3-year build, and his name is Kenny Dillingham. He wants to win right now. He believes Arizona State should be 4-0 right now. So in order to get to where Kenny Dillingham wants this team to be, we're going to have to see improvement out of Sam Leavitt, and hopefully that is looked upon as constructive criticism and not just me dismissing him outright. But we've got enough evidence right now that we know what we need to see from him if we want to compete to win. Because we got an offensive line full of 23-year-olds. We got a bunch of wide receivers whose talent hasn't matched the opportunities they've been given to use it. And the defense is playing out of their minds. This is a very, very good defense. Texas Tech averages well over 300 passing yards a game. Well over. Arizona State gave up 200. Arizona State's run defense is amongst the best in the conference right now. And I know they've only played one conference game, but they did have Mississippi State. They did have Texas State. They've played the run well. And yeah, there have been some bad penalties. There were some drive extending penalties on Arizona State's defense, but for the most part, this defense is carrying the team. The only reason that people don't want to give the defense grace is because the offense hasn't left room for the defense to get grace. The offense needs to hold up their end of the bargain. And that all starts with the quarterback position. Because you can't tell me Cam Scadaboo's doing any, or could be doing more. You can't say that. And you could say, yeah, there's a couple of catches that wide receivers need to make. There's going to be some drop balls. It's the case with every single team in the country. You have to factor that in. It's like if you're a dog food magnet or you're Costco dealing with a dog food magnet, and they're going to expect some loss in shipping. Some bags are going to get torn. Some are going to fall off the back of the truck. You factor those things in. There's going to be a couple of drops every single game. It is what it is, right? You have to expect that. You can't expect everyone on the team to be perfect all the time and then say, but the quarterback's young, so we're not going to hold him to that same standard. Doesn't work that way. At least not on this podcast, where I talk to myself in a closet. Anyway, so let's get back to this Kansas game. I believe Arizona State can win. I believe very, very strongly in that the biggest indicator of what could happen in this game is that one team turns the ball over a lot and the other team has found a knack for procuring turnovers. So if Jalen Daniels throws up a couple of ducks, I expect the Keith Abney, Shamari Simmons to come down with it. I really do. And I think with Arizona State's defensive line being healthy, you might see some magic. But at the same time, I cannot stress to you enough how fast this offense is with a capital F. Fast. Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels, they can fly. And even then, I would say Daniel Highshaw is, as far as acceleration, first step, could end up being the most dangerous player in this entire game. They're rushing for 225 yards a game in a 1-4 season. They're averaging 6 yards a carry in a 1-4 season. The difference is that they're throwing, they're fumbling, they're averaging 2.2 turnovers per game. I actually fumbled over my words about their fumbling. That's fun irony. But anyway, so I expect Arizona State to win. It's going to take Arizona State playing like they have, and it's going to take Kansas playing like they have. So basically, I am just I'm pointing out the expectations. The most interesting thing about this Kansas team is that they are 1-4 despite being plus 60 in yardage on the season. This game will be close. This team is tough. You cannot just look at the record. And as far as Arizona State goes, I think they should be 4-0. I think they blew it in Lubbock. And so it actually does feel good going into a situation knowing that, hey, Kansas hasn't played as well as they really can play. So that's what makes them dangerous. But you look at Arizona State and you can say the exact same thing about them. It all stems from the quarterback position. I've gone way, way longer than a typical podcast. I think I'm at like an hour and 40 minutes right now. So we're going to skip some of the staples of the Fortcast. We're going to skip Todd of the Week. We're going to skip Sun Devil Signs. And I don't want to make fun of, Kansas too much. Definitely next time around, I will. I know that some of the Sun Devil Signs, I like to poke fun at their alumni and stuff like that. And they do have a few questionable alumni, but they also have like a lot of fun celebrities and comedians and stuff that went to University of Kansas as well. But I know there's going to be a lot of Kansas fans out there because it's going to be their first opportunity to see their team in Tempe. Everybody wants to move to Arizona. Everybody wants to live in Arizona. So I expect to see a lot of red in the stands. Be kind to those folks. This is going to be a long-standing relationship. Now that we're both part of the Big 12, make sure that they have a good time, buy a Kansas fan a drink, and hopefully they can drown their sorrows with it. And yeah, make sure to visit charliehustle.com in order to support this podcast. Enter the code. I am so sorry. Enter the code 101215. It's 3 numbers, so I get confused. Spell out 10, TEN 1215 for 15% off all non-sale items. They got some great ASU stuff on there. And thanks to our guy, Cole Streeper at Uniformity, we know it's going to be a maroon monsoon. Hopefully those dark colors in that sun aren't our undoing. But I am excited for Arizona State this weekend, their first meeting with Kansas. I believe it's going to be a 28-24 win. Next week, we will get back to our regularly scheduled programs. We will have our regularly scheduled segments, and possibly introduce a video element and maybe even have a guest. So it's not just me talking to myself. I appreciate anybody who supports this podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure to share it if you can, and be there for Sun Devil Spaces every Wednesday right there on Twitter or X if you're nasty. This has been the Fortcast. My name is Ralph Amsden. If you live with a heart of gratitude, the world is a wondrous place. Forks up. We'll catch you next week. Go Devils.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.